So we will go back to the practices which involve a certain use of visual imagery, but just as before, it's perfectly fine to just stay with the methods that use phrases and so forth for generating loving kindness directly instead, if you prefer. And for this next practice, we would need to think of a thing from astronomy, and that's a hypothetical space object known as a white hole, which is the opposite of a black hole. So a black hole is a thing that has such dense gravity that it sucks everything into it, presumably, and we've seen it in movies and so forth. The white hole is an imaginary opposite of that. It's a hypothetical object. I'm not particularly sure if those exist, but a white hole radiates all the time. How that exactly happens is another question, but it's sort of like a portal into something that just emits light and radiation and things of that nature. So this specific practice actually has a direct connection to the United Kingdom because it comes from the lineage of Akong Rinpoche, who was the founder of Samiling. He was a greatly realized adept yogi who found many ways to teach meditation in traditional ways, but also in ways that would be accessible to everyone and would not at all be limited to simply the traditional forms. So he taught this practice with regards to compassion, but because the first of the four three measurables are easily interchangeable in some ways, we will use it for loving kindness. And to front load it, in this practice, we imagine ourselves as a door, as a portal, or as a white hole, if you wish, or a golden portal into something. So we no longer focus on our body and so forth. We replace ourselves with a door. And what is that door doing? Through that door, all of the kinetic energy of our mind, all of our random thoughts and mental chatter and all of that comes out as golden light of loving kindness that radiates outwards. So we imagine that our physical body is replaced with this portal. Let's use golden color because that's the color Akong Rinpoche describes. Golden portal. And out of that golden portal, this hole in the fabric of reality, come rays of golden loving kindness that gradually reach all beings. So we would start with the ones most physically close to us, and then gradually keep extending that. The beauty of this practice is not simply because we're imagining that loving kindness is coming forth. We already did it when we were imagining an orb of warmth and light in our navel center. In this specific practice, we're using all the random mental events as fuel for loving kindness. So as soon as we notice with our introspective awareness that there's some mental chatter going on, we, with the exhalation, for example, but it doesn't need to be tied to exhalation, release it in the form of these loving kindness rays that go out everywhere. And over time, eventually, by the end of the meditation, we would hope to reach the very limits of the universe, of the multiverse, whatever it is that we like to think of. Basically, all beings being already encompassed by that loving kindness. And when it touches them, and that's common for all these practices, when these lights of loving kindness touch others, they help them flourish. And so eventually everyone becomes an embodiment of loving kindness, and everything becomes an expression, an effulgence of loving kindness. So that's one way to think about it. But we can experiment with it right now, but just as I've mentioned before, perfectly fine to also do any other loving kindness practice if this one sounds a bit weird. But still there's value in trying, so let's find a comfortable stationary position. To begin the actual meditation, we come back to our body and we allow our body to start releasing tension while breathing naturally. Going deeper and deeper and deeper into a union with the quality of stillness. Through releasing more and more. With a corner of our mind making sure there's no areas that are still quite tense. Making sure there's a profound sense of restfulness in our hands and fingers, in our face, in our pelvic floor, throughout our torso. And then starting to generate loving kindness for ourselves. In this case, this is a preliminary stage to make sure there's enough intensity of self-directed loving kindness before we start extending loving kindness to others. We can just rest in loving kindness using phrases or add a visual element to it by seeing golden waves of loving kindness spreading out from an orb of light in the center of our body, at our navel center. And then the intensity of self, this self-directed loving kindness, becomes so high that our entire body and mind can flourish and transform into a golden portal, a portal made of golden light. A portal into the realm of basic goodness. And through this portal, the moving energy of our mind comes through as rays of warm golden light in the nature of loving kindness. And these are first extended to the beings around us physically. A union of the imagined rays and the actual wish itself, which we can still activate using the phrase if necessary. It's as if each ray contains the energy of the phrase, contains the wish. And when it touches the beings around us, they experience that warm, nourishing glow that does indeed propel them, does indeed move them closer to genuine well-being. All the other mental events, all the other mental states, including being distracted, thinking, losing ourselves in stories, and so forth, all of that gets transformed into the golden light of loving kindness that we release through the portal. And that golden light slowly extends to a wider and wider circle of beings. To more and more beings around us physically, nourishing them. And of course, not just the humans around us, because there are so many beings who are in need of this loving kindness, here and elsewhere. And so we slowly extend it to more and more beings. Increasing the scope, but also the intensity of the wish as it pours through the portal. If we hear any beings, the same loving kindness is extended to them. If we recall beings, once again, touching them with that light of warm, nourishing kindness as well. And then we just remain in this process of pouring loving kindness out into the world, making sure the wish is still there, that it has not become merely a way to flex the muscles of our imagination. And so we have the imagery, the words of the wish, the feeling of expansiveness and reaching out, and a sense of trust towards the force of loving kindness. If we need to, we can use the breath as an anchor or as a reminder to release more with the exhalation. Except here we are releasing into the form of loving kindness. Then gently releasing the images, the aspiration, and resting in spacious openness. And then within that spacious openness, finding experiences of the body, to rest with them. And then introducing some movement to transition back into our shared space. So, just as a reminder, positive images, positive thoughts, positive feelings, and trust towards whatever it is that we're practicing with. In this case, loving kindness, but also our own basic goodness and also our ability to transform the mind. All of these brought together will bring certain efficiency to our practice. And this specific method with the portal, we will repeat every day in this very session. We will use some other methods to keep playing with them, but this one we will repeat a few times because it seems to be very straightforward. It's quite powerful for many people that I've talked to. Some people use it regularly as one of their main loving kindness practices, or at least as an enhancement technique. So it would be good for us to develop some confidence in it before we end the retreat on Saturday. So we'll be repeating it just like we're repeating the main practice of working with the phrases, and just like we're repeating the vision quest every morning to develop some confidence in those methods. And now we will go back to the practice that we did yesterday in this very session as well, and that is self-directed loving kindness, in which we also imagine a circle of beings who represent kindness for us. There are some studies on the efficiency or on the effectiveness or on the effects of even looking at a picture of someone we care about or feel loved by, and feeling their presence with us, whether that can affect our mental well-being. And in brief, yes, it can. So here we're doing something even more ambitious by imagining multiple beings. Actually, within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there are practices in which we would imagine a so-called field of refuge, meaning that in the space in front of us, we are imagining sometimes hundreds of different beings that represent qualities of wisdom and compassion, usually surrounding some central figure that plays a key role as the window into our basic goodness. But around that central figure, that would be dozens, hundreds of different figures. And the point is not simply to train in visualization and to achieve a lot of clarity and develop the ability to see these masters, but also transcendental, transhistorical beings and so forth. The point is also to feel that they are our best friends in a way. They're best friends on the path of training the mind. They're looking at us with affectionate, compassionate appreciation. They're happy with us. And we're happy to hang out with them in return. So it becomes, in a way, like playing with our imaginary friend, but much more deep and meaningful than that, because it's not simply a lonely child's way of escaping reality here, even though probably having an imaginary friend has more uses than just escaping loneliness. In this case, we are actually finding a point of contact with our basic goodness through envisioning these beings radiating wisdom and compassion. And we use special ways of connecting to their qualities that we will use later when we reach that point in the notes to, once again, fuel our practice. This is important for the four immeasurables in general. Here, we're just using them to feel loved, to feel that connection, and then to activate loving kindness with greater strength. But now we will do, at the end of the meditation, we will do a tiny backflip and extend our loving kindness to them as well, because why not? So let's find a comfortable stationary position, but first feel free to stretch as an act of kindness for your body if that's necessary. Eventually, we arrive at a state of relative physical stability. And then we can ask ourselves, once again as a step of preparation, how can I position and adjust my body so that the body itself becomes good space for loving kindness? So we see if we can or need to elongate the spine, comfortably position our limbs, and so forth. We decide what to do with our gaze, whether to keep our eyes closed or open or partially hooded. And all three of these options are acceptable for the four immeasurables. Then we notice the sensations of being in contact with the ground, gratefully acknowledging the fact that the earth is holding us in this meditation and in all of the other practices that we're doing. And for a moment contemplating whether we can indeed perceive the earth as the greatest bodhisattva, which is what Master Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes used to say about the planet. What would that even mean? The biggest embodiment, the biggest expression of wisdom and compassion and union. And then breathing with the earth and with all of its beings. Allowing the breath and its tactile waves to wash away excessive tension, restlessness, compulsive ideation. Then all around us, in a circle, we suddenly see all the beings that for us represent kindness, tenderness, care. Historical beings, beings who are our friends or relatives, our mentors and teachers, even fictional characters if they truly represent that quality. Sitting around us and looking at us as our personal cheerleading team that we're invoking right now. And yet they're not here to be cheerleaders for our problematic habits. They're not here to help us grasp more strongly at our identity that we see as fixed and incapable of changing. Not at all. In this moment, they're seeing our very core, our vulnerable wish for happiness, our potential to attain that happiness. And they're holding us in their tender, affectionate awareness. So we're just breathing naturally and enjoying that. And once again, that's valid because at all times there are beings that are capable of holding everyone in tenderness. And then by extension in loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. And then out of that tenderness arises loving kindness, because all these beings are wishing for us to be happy and have the causes of happiness. And we can imagine them using the phrases that we chose for our practice for now. And together with them, we're also using the same wishes for ourselves. generating the wish for ourselves, absorbing the flow of loving kindness from others, knowing that on a deeper level there's no separation between the two, because all loving kindness springs forth from basic goodness. And that basic goodness is neither one nor many. Again and again centering us in loving kindness for ourselves. And then opening it up to not just ourselves, but also to everyone in that circle. And by extension to everyone who is sending loving kindness to all beings. Simply substituting I for we. May we be happy. And resting in this wish, strengthening it if necessary, returning to it again and again, so that our awareness can be shaped into this broader, intense form of loving kindness. And then, as if this wish was coming from the depths of each and every being, helping them all break through all their inner hindrances, all the mental blocks, all the problematic patterns. We make it boundless by wishing, may all beings be happy, or using the set of phrases that we have chosen for our practice. And then allowing these appearances and even the aspiration itself to dissolve in the spaciousness of the mind, so that we can rest in that spaciousness without a reference point. Then grounding ourselves in the body. Except this time we'll spend a bit more time with the breath, not really rushing to conclude the practice yet. But once again, breathing with the earth and its beings. And then finally, gently introducing some movement and concluding the practice. One more important component of this practice and any other practice is also doing so-called informal practice, which is a big thing that is discussed a lot in the tradition. Basically, formal practice is any practice that we formally measure using a timer, or that we do on a meditation cushion, or while doing formal walking meditation. A special period of time set apart for practice is formal practice. And there are all sorts of formal practices that we can do, but what makes them formal is that we're doing them formally. And then informal practice is just integrating our meditation of any kind with whatever else it is that we're doing, including walking, sitting on the toilet, eating, looking around, having coffee, chatting with people, and so forth. And loving kindness is one of the beautiful practices that can be very easily integrated into pretty much anything, because some practices would be much more tricky to integrate, actually, because, even, for example, meditations on the nature of the mind, or meditations on emptiness, or on interdependence, you really have to be quite confident in those to integrate them with the activity of, cutting flowers, or folding in cheese or something of that nature. Whereas with loving kindness, it's quite simple. You're folding in that cheese and you're thinking, may all beings be happy. You're cutting those flowers and you're thinking, may all beings be happy. Basically, whatever it is you're doing, you're just thinking that. You're sending that thought out. And so now that we're moving on to finally doing loving kindness for others, starting with that benefactor figure, our walking meditation, or simply our walks, can also be upgraded, if we wish to the next method. And this next method does not require us walking extra slowly. We can still use that one where one step is one word or one phrase, we rest with it, then we take the next step. And after about 10 steps, we turn back and then we walk in the opposite direction. That's very formal, and those types of practice exist not only in the Theravada tradition, but also in some Christian contemplative orders where there's a courtyard set out for them to do slow contemplative walks. The method that we can use or experiment with now is to just take a regular walk anywhere, including here. While we're alone there, we're sending loving kindness to ourselves. As soon as any being enters the sphere of our awareness, there's a bird, there's a dog, there's a human, there's a bunch of humans, or we hear noises, human noises from somewhere, we direct loving kindness to them personally, or we just use we. We expand the circle so that it includes both us and those beings. So let's say I'm walking, poopy-doopy-doo, and that's how I walk. And then I'm sending loving kindness to myself, may I be happy. And then I see a nice dog just playing there. So then it's, may we be happy. Me and the dog, why not? Ha ha ha. Then the dog disappears and there's a group of teenagers taking a walk, which is pretty scary actually, because they can be really nasty. But then I'm still thinking, may we be happy, what to do. Then they eventually, hopefully also disappear, and then there's someone else or something else or a being of sort. And in a way we could then argue, well, isn't it true that from a Buddhist point of view, we're never alone, given that there are 27 billion beings within our body, probably just vibing, and then there's also invisible beings floating all around, and there's local deities and spirits and whatnot. Yeah, that's also true. So from that point of view, it could always be we. But if we don't go into that whole discussion, then it can be very comfortably me when I'm walking through the park alone. As soon as someone appears, it's we, or we can direct it straight to them. May you be happy, little dog. And then it's when the dog has left, it's back to us. We could do the same thing sitting on a bench, obviously. But generally, that's a nice way to take a walk with loving kindness. And loving kindness is one of those practices that can carry us through pretty much everything in terms of being very easy to maintain. So from that point of view, once again, we can do it when we're lying down, we can do it while working out, we can be hanging upside down, and stretching our back that way. We could be making backflip. We can be doing pretty much anything and generating loving kindness through visual methods or with a phrase. And in the Japanese tradition, there's this concept, or rather poetic image, that is used in some traditions, including the Pure Land tradition, of having our practice be like a red thread that we can hold on to at all times. Within the Pure Land tradition, that red thread is the recitation of the name of the Buddha of Infinite Light. And you have great poets of the past, including Ryokan and some others, who would write poetry, beautiful poetry, about how they were witnessing moments of joy and they were witnessing moments of suffering. And of course, there's lots of that stuff in Japanese history. So they would witness, earthquakes and hails and epidemics and whatnot, and then conclude that with, and I'm still holding on to this thread of my practice, which is a very elegant way of living, going through life. So for us, in a similar manner, we could all be writing poetry saying, had nice lunch, hit my foot on a rock, may all beings be happy. Got fired, saw a pretty bird, argued with someone on the subway, may all beings be happy. And I'm not making fun of Japanese poetry. On the contrary, I think it's such a beautiful way to live, in a way where we seal each experience with loving kindness, because what else could we seal it with? We could seal it with emptiness if we're there. That would be very advanced. But if not, better do that than seal it with our usual mental barking, as Sylvia Burstyn calls it, where it's like, this is bad and this is horrible, and it's like complains about everything. And so that's one way of doing it. And then with that, we would at least know, hey, as a yogi of loving kindness, I do have this red thread of loving kindness that I can hold on to at all times. And then we can, that's perfectly permissible, and sometimes even encouraged, build all the other practices that are necessary for either therapeutic effect or for reaching awakening around that one thread that is for us the most inspiring. So you would have in Tibetan history yogis for whom that red thread was their practice of Tara, the female Buddha, for example, or their practice of the Buddha of compassion, or their practice of compassion itself, or their practice of loving kindness. So people find these small things to hold on to, and then they just arrange everything around that one central axis. And for that reason, we have people who are referred to as yogis of loving kindness, or yogis of compassion, or yogis of the nature of the mind, or yogis of Tara. Not because they did just one that practice, excluding everything, that's not really viable, but because they made it the central element of their path, and everything else just comfortably positioned itself around this central axis. And then you have a whole mandala of practice with your central element and everything else that inspires you, or that's necessary built around it. So that's a nice thing to experiment with as we are doing small daily stuff like eating, sitting on the toilet, etc., and trying to throw in that loving kindness everywhere. Through that, we first of all develop greater flexibility of awareness, so we continue being or becoming better and better yogis, as we have discussed in the last session. And at the same time, we are powerfully transforming the fabric of our experiences already, because a very famous analogy given for why informal practice is also necessary is that, well, formal practice only takes up so much time, unless we are a very advanced meditator who can spend 12 hours a day in practice. For most of us, we start with 10 minutes, and even that is a blessing, and then we can gradually extend it, but most people who have an active daily life would not be meditating for more than 2 or 3 hours. And even that is really a luxury and takes a lot of discipline. So we have just that little amount of practice that we do formally every day. And then we have 23 hours, 50 minutes left for informal practice. Loving kindness can be done while dreaming and sleeping. We maybe will have some time to discuss that a little bit when we reach the point about benefits. But at least in our waking time, there's so much loving kindness that we can put into it. And it will really change the subjective quality of our life, just how our each day feels. Because then we will be spontaneously writing those haikus about, so this did that, may all beings be happy. Because it became a powerful habit. And that will very much also strengthen our formal meditations. So sometimes people ask, what's the best way to prepare for solitary retreat? I've read about all these wonderful yogis. I want to also go in a cave and meditate for 12 years or something like that. And the answer that I've uniformly heard from different masters was, well, learn how to practice Dharma all the time in your current existence. Then you will be prepared for cave meditation. So that includes things like that. So if our entire life became practice of loving kindness, it would be very easy to transition into a cave and do some more formal meditation to cultivate concentration and so forth. But if we have not done that, then as soon as we enter a cave, trouble will start. And sometimes people go into formal retreat with a lot of excitation and joy, and then it ends very abruptly because the mind and the body have not been properly prepared. And we are preparing them through practices like this done in daily life. So let's experiment over the next hour and then enjoy our dinner. Thank you.